Hi everyone, it's Justin from Just Rise. Today we're doing something a little different and I'm pretty excited about it. Today we are going to be making my Jalapeño Cheddar English muffin bread. It was one of our most sought after breads that we sold in our bakery. I am going to type out the recipe and I'll put it right in the description below. Please like and subscribe our channel. It's somewhere down there, somewhere. It would help us out and we would greatly appreciate it. So let's get started. The first thing that we're gonna do is I have everything pretty much all laid out and measured out for the most part. So the first thing we wanna do is we actually wanna bloom the yeast. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the yeast, I have the yeast in here, a quarter cup of hot water, warm water, not hot water, should be just about room temperature. And I'm gonna mix that in with the yeast. And then I'm gonna take, and I have a tablespoon of honey, and I'm gonna take that. And I'm just gonna mix all of this together and I'm gonna let it sit for a few minutes while I get everything else ready. And this will bloom the yeast and get everything started. The way you know your yeast is active and good is if it starts to bubble after a few minutes. And the yeast that I use is just Fleischmann's active yeast, I think. So I buy it in a big giant block from Sam's Club or BJ's or wherever I can get it. So see, it's nothing really that attractive. So I'll just let that sit while I'm preparing everything else. All right, now I do use a food processor for the cheese and the jalapenos. The reason that I do this is because if I use a shredder for the cheese, I find that the shreds of cheese is almost a little too small for the bread and it kind of gets lost. I kind of like to have the big chunks of, or bigger chunks of cheese in with my bread. So I'm just gonna take that, here I'll move the milk out of the way, and I'm just gonna chop this up into smaller pieces to make it easier for the food processor. I know it's probably really exciting to watch me cut cheese, but there it is. So I have some boxed cheese and then I have the jalapenos. And if you aren't comfortable with cutting hot peppers, you know, because they might burn, so use gloves if you need to. Capsaicin in it doesn't really bother my hands. So the other thing that you want to do, I use probably about 6 to 8 hot peppers, depending on how hot you like it. So 3 of these peppers I'm gonna cut in half and I'm actually just gonna take the seeds out because I don't want my bread really that spicy. I want the flavor of it, but I don't want too much of the heat myself. So if you like a lot of heat, by all means, leave all of these seeds in there. It'll taste really good on the way in, but the next morning it's a little uncomfortable. All right, on that note, I'm gonna take all of these and I'm just gonna throw them right in my food processor for a few minutes. You could chop them up finely with a knife, but if you have a food processor, it's preferable. And you're just gonna work that until the pieces are pretty small. So see, this is what I'm looking at. Not really any big chunks left. It's all pretty much smaller pieces. I'm just gonna get another container to put that in. All right. So I have my jalapenos all ready to go. And right in this same bowl, because it doesn't really make a difference, I'm gonna process the cheese. And I am, again, gonna use the blade attachment for this. So, blade goes in, blocks of cheese go in. I'm gonna do this in 2 batches. So I have about 8 ounces of cheese. I have a little bit more that I'm using for my bread just because I had a half block that was sitting in my fridge, so I figured I'd throw it in too because I like cheese. so you can see that there is a pretty big difference between, I mean, yeah, it has jalapenos mixed in with it, but there are some pretty good sized chunks of cheese in there rather than having it all smaller shredded. All right, and this will be the last batch of this. And again, there are some bigger chunks in there. Some giant chunks in there. I'm okay with that. Now, if you never had jalapeno cheddar English muffin toasting bread, it's great for toast, but it makes a really killer grilled cheese, especially with a couple slices of bacon with it. Really tasty. All right. So, I have my yeast, which you can see has bloomed. It's foaming nicely. All right, and so going back to this bowl, I am going to add in the milk, and I'm going to add in a cup of flour. Now, the milk should be about room temperature. I shouldn't really feel a difference if I stick my finger in the milk. My hands are clean. I washed them beforehand. I promise. Ryan's laughing at me. He's behind the camera. Because, you know.
I'd call it chuckling, but...
Yeah, well, can't win them all. We're actually really lucky that our neighbors have stopped bowling upstairs, or they're rolling around a cement mixer or something like
possibly
that.
Training for the Olympics.
I'm not really sure. Earlier they were practicing javelin throwing. I was convinced upstairs, but you know, depends on the day. So, to this, like I said, I'm going to add 1 cup of the flour. It's 5.5 cups of flour total. So what you do is you just take 1 cup and you mix it in before you mix in the rest of the flour. Kind of gets everything started. And to that, I'm actually going to add the cheese and the jalapenos all right in that same. Get rid of some of these things that Ryan's pointing at and telling me to clean up my workspace so I'm not a complete slob on TV. And since I'm wicked good at things, I realized that with the flour, you're supposed to add your baking powder and your salt, which I had measured out, and I never did that. So luckily, I only added a cup of the flour. So I'm going to take the 2 teaspoons of salt, right? 2 teaspoons of salt, and the baking powder, and I'm just going to mix that in with the flour real quick first. Whisk that together real quick. All right, now here comes the fun part. So I'm just going to add the rest of the flour mixture in one addition. And I'm going to mix it all up. It takes a little while to incorporate all the flour. And I actually hate doing it this way. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to grab a piece of paper towel. Probably going to cut this part out of the video. All right. I just took a quick second and kind of cleaned up my workspace a little bit. I put on gloves because this part is really messy. It's not like a dough that's going to come together and be like a nice, solid, smooth dough. No, it's going to be a wet, sloppy mess. So I'm using rubber gloves, and you could use a rubber spatula, but if you have one of these, they're just bowl dough scrapers, and they work really well when you're mixing in things like this. So I'm just going to keep mixing this together. until all of the flour is incorporated and you have no dry pockets of flour in the dough. Like I said, it's gonna be wet, it's gonna be sticky, it's gonna be messy, and it's gonna be spicy. And that's wonderful. All right, so I have the dough all made. Now I'm gonna take my 2 bread pans, which I've already taken and I sprayed heavily with Pam. You can use shortening. If you're using a glass container to cook it in, make sure you use a lot of Pam or whatever your grease to make it non-stick, because it can be a disaster if it sticks to the bottom. Right, Ryan?
I have no experience with that, Justin.
Yes, we do. Plenty. But I find that these metal pans work really well. And I like to weigh my stuff out because it just makes 2 even loaves. So I'm gonna take a good chunk of this, and usually it's about 900 grams or so that I'm aiming for. So that says 912. So I'm gonna go to the other one. It should be right around the same. Look at that, 913, nope, 912. Exactly. Just that good. All right, so I have my 2 loaves of bread. I'm gonna take off my gloves. I'm gonna wet my hands a little bit, and I'm just gonna take this and I'm gonna work it, and I'm gonna smooth it out with my wet fingers, because it just creates a nice surface on the top, and it helps for it to not stick to your fingers. All right. So super simple. Jalapeno bread is not difficult, and like I said, it tastes really amazing. So I have these 2 loaves of bread, and I'm gonna let them sit for about an hour. I'm looking for them to rise maybe about 1 inch above the pan, and it takes about an hour, a little over an hour. Half hour into the rising time, you wanna make sure you preheat your oven to 400 degrees. And I'll do that, and I'll see you when this is ready to go in the oven. Thanks for watching. All right, it's been about an hour. I forgot to mention that I did cover the bread with saran wrap that I sprayed with Pam to try to avoid it sticking too much, because it is a very sticky bread, and it did stick. So I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna put it in the oven. It should take right around an hour. No, excuse me, it should take half an hour to cook, 30 to 35 minutes. You're looking for the bread to be an internal temperature of right around 190 degrees or higher. So we'll see you when this is done. All right, jalapeno cheddar English muffin toasting bread, fresh out of the oven. One of the things that I love about this bread, and I don't know if you can see, but these really dark spots where the cheese has kind of baked into the bread and created a nice, like, almost crust on top of it. And the reason why I use yellow cheddar in the cheese is because you can actually see the chunks of cheese. If you use white cheese, it just kind of blends in with the bread. I always take some butter and I just brush the tops of the loaves of bread with butter, because it gives it a nice shiny crust. But how do I know these are done? Because I actually took a thermometer and I made sure that they were at least 190 degrees. I'm actually looking for closer to 200. And I find that it takes about 35 minutes. At 30 minutes, the bread always looks kind of done, but if you cut into the center of it, it won't be done. So cook it for the extra 5 minutes if you need to. It should be, like I said, a darker golden color. So thanks for watching. Again, click like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.